All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to those of you who've just joined us in the session. So we have our attendee numbers coming up. So I think let's get started in the interests of time. So a big hello and welcome back again to our Gender Equality and Global Markets training program. So it's great to see you all here today for our session. So thanks to those who've already said hello in the chat. Feel free to reintroduce yourselves as we're getting started. So, firstly, a big thank you again from myself to the South Pacific Stock Exchange team for hosting this session with us today. And of course, a truly big thank you to our partners on this program who helped make this work possible, to the IFC, to UN Women, to Columbia University, and the Luxembourg government for their support on this program as well. So, just as a reminder for anyone who might have missed the first part of our training, hopefully you did get to join us, but if you didn't, you'll be able to watch a recording of that on our webpage, which we'll make available later this week. And we'll share that link a number of times in the chat, but that's also where you'll find the slide handouts from all of our presentations as well. So, to kick us off for today's session, I'm very pleased to welcome our opening speaker today. Leila Savas joins us from the IFC International Finance Corporation. She is the Regional Corporate Governance Program Manager for their East Asia Pacific program. So, a big thank you, Leila, for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fiona. Good afternoon, Bula, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Leyal Savaş. I lead IFC's corporate governance projects in East Asia and Pacific. I'm based in Bangkok, Thailand, and it's a great pleasure to be with you today. I would like to take a few minutes of your time to share some highlights from the gender equality training program we have been delivering together with UN Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative. We launched this program back in 2023 with a very simple idea to make gender equality more practical and actionable for people working across financial markets. And since then, we have delivered the training in 18 different markets and reached nearly 3,000 participants, which really shows the level of interest and momentum around this important topic. What makes this program different is that it breaks a very complex issue into very clear and manageable steps. The training is structured in 4 different modules that guide participants throughout this journey, if I may say. We start by building awareness, raising awareness around this topic, especially around sustainable finance, and helping people understand the real financial implications of gender inequality. And from there, we move into improving corporate reporting, strengthening literacy around gender equality, because without good data and transparency, it is very hard to drive the meaningful change in any market. And importantly, we also focus on the opportunities. So advancing gender equality isn't just about addressing the gaps, but there are also some opportunities. So it's also about identifying new market opportunities, improving performance, and creating long-term value. The program is very much a collaborative effort. UN Sustainable Stock Exchange and IFC developed the content together, drawing on IFC's Women on Boards and in Business Leadership program with support from the government of Luxembourg. Actually, this initial version was developed quite a number of years ago, and I still remember doing the pilot program maybe 7 years ago in Myanmar. It was one of the first trainings in Asia. We also deliver the training in partnership with UN Women, and we are fortunate to bring in guest speakers from different organizations like Bloomberg, the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, and the Age Certified Foundation. They help ground the discussion in real-world experience, which participants really value. Another thing that stands out is the diversity of the participants. So we have people joining from listed and also non-listed companies, stock exchanges, investors, regulators, advisory firms, and companies. So that mix creates really rich discussions and help ideas travel across different parts of the market and different parts of the region and different countries as well. And one point I always like to highlight is that about 1/3 of the participants are men. So that matters because gender equality isn't something that can be advanced by women only. It takes everyone, and it is encouraging to see that level of engagement. So again, I'm very happy to be part of this important event. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope you will find this event very useful. Thank you. Back to you, Fiona.
Thanks so much, Lael. Really appreciated. And as ever, thank you very much to yourself and to IFC for your support for this program. And great to hear you were involved right from the beginning as well. That's fantastic. Excellent. So, with that, let's get into a few practical points, which I'll just recap from my side. So, firstly, just a couple of quick housekeeping points, which we mentioned last time, but just as a reminder, you can continue to use the chat as you're doing now to share any general comments as we're moving along. But if you have questions for the team, please make sure you put those in the Q&A box that you should also have available at the bottom of your toolbar on Zoom, and that will just allow us to track and respond to those questions. Our format will be the same as it was for Monday's session, where we'll have 2 hours together. Please make sure you do use that opportunity to ask your questions. So you're very welcome to ask any questions you have in the Q&A as you work through the session, and our team will do the best we can to respond to all of those for you. We'd love to get your participation and engagement in the session as well. So as we did last time, we're going to be using a number of options for interaction, including polls and Menti. So please make sure to take part in those. Just take a little sip of water. And then finally, if you'd like to get your completion certificate for taking part in the training, you'll be able to get that at the end of our training today. So we'll share the instructions at the end of the training, but you'll need to complete a feedback survey, which we'll share with you later. So just a quick reminder again that all of the training materials from today's session are available to download from our link in the chat there. You'll find the slide handouts, including the links to all of the resources that we discuss at the bottom of the page. And after the training, we'll also be adding the recordings from both parts of our training there as well. So just to reintroduce myself and Landon, we'll be delivering the training again for you from the UN SSE team. And we're also pleased to be joined by a number of experts today throughout the session. Firstly, we have Sarah Danzeo joining us from the UN Women team. So Sarah is the Sustainable Finance Consultant with UN Women at the ROAP program. So big thank you and welcome, Sarah, for joining us.
Bula Vinaka, everyone. Good morning from Bangkok. Thank you, Fiona, and UNSSC, as well as IFC and Luxembourg, for hosting this wonderful webinar. As Fiona said, my name is Sara Danzeo, and I'm actually the lead of a Sustainable Finance Initiative in collaboration with IFC, UNSCC to advance gender equality in capital markets. So I'm very excited to be with you today. Before we get into the the presentation, and Fiona, feel free to share the slides already. I'd like to make a quick premise in terms of what we're going to talk about today and why this matters to you as private sector companies. And I link this to a research that UN Women has done back in 2022 after UN Women engaged with over 350 stakeholders, including more than 150 private sector companies, to understand what are the benefits of developing gender responsive strategies for your procurement and your communication with the suppliers. And the research showed many business benefits. So the number one benefits, which I will share because in this moment amid so many supply chain disruptions and challenging global context, talking about gender responsive procurement and developing gender responsive procurement builds greater supplier resilience. So that's the number one benefit. But also companies that practice gender responsive procurement benefit from increased revenues and reduced procurement spend due to their broader range of suppliers, many of which actually become customers. And beyond this, strengthening, I think we talked about this last Monday in terms of what are also general benefits of promoting gender equality in your organization. We have the fact that gender responsive procurement strengthens loyalty with customers, with partners. It strengthens your brand. It is correlated with more innovation and improves service delivery. So this was just a quick introduction to why this matters to you today. And Fiona, I cannot see the slide.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
Sorry, we were just in the introduction, so I was just introducing
Oh, I'm
you
so sorry.
as a speaker. So
I
we'll
am
come
so
back to
sorry.
your slides a bit later.
Oh, okay. Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for setting out a little bit more about what we're going to come back to later in the training. Really appreciate it. And great to have you here with us joining us today in the session. Okay, so our second speakers, guest speakers that we'll have coming a bit later in the training as well, will be Guillaume Jacques, who is a sustainable finance analyst with the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. I see we have Guillaume with us already, and he'll be talking to us about gender bonds. And then finally, towards the end of our workshop, we also have David Pritchett joining us from the EDGE Certified Foundation. If you remember, we introduced EDGE a little bit in our training on Monday as a certification standard you can use to improve your performance internally within your organization. So David will come to join us at the end of the training to talk about that as well. Fantastic. So alongside this, just to mention again our 4-module structure that we'll be revisiting that we used in the first part of our training. So if you remember on our session earlier in the week, we covered prepare and align. And now today we're going to be moving into implement and communicate. So this is really building off what we learned from last lesson. And an important note that we would like to say here is that this is, of course, an ongoing process. So we know that in reality, of course, in an organization, you're going to be working across a lot of these areas in tandem. And so whilst we present these steps in a nice order here, of course, we know in your organization, you may come to these in a different fashion. And so for our training today, we've got 2 main learning objectives, which we're hoping to help you achieve in our time together. So firstly, we'd like to help you to understand how to capture market value for gender equality performance. So be that through gender smart investment strategies, or perhaps through the creation of gender-focused financial products as well. And secondly, we'd like to help you today to communicate gender-related information with both internal stakeholders through that responsive procurement practice that Sarah mentioned to us there, and also through your corporate reporting as well. And that just shows you in an agenda how our time breaks down across the session. We'll take a short break again in the middle as we did last time. So to get us started again, we'd like to do a quick Menti poll to get a sense of how much you already know about these topics. So thanks for sharing that in the chat, Landon, and I'll just share my screen now as well to show you the Menti. Okay. So as a reminder, you can also go to menti.com and enter that 7-digit code you see on the screen now, or you can use the QR code if you'd like to get into Menti that way. But I'll give you a second just to let us know what's your current kind of level of comfort or understanding on those 3 areas that we're looking to talk about today. So firstly, identifying the value that gender equality can add to investment strategies. Secondly, on how to communicate gender-related information to investors. And then finally, to also explain to colleagues the financial value of gender equality. Great. So it looks as though we've got about 20 of you responded so far, but we have 100 in the session. So it would definitely be great to get lots more of you taking part in this if possible. We'll use Menti a couple more times, so I'll give you a few more seconds, but yeah, please do join us if you can. It's great to get your engagement as we move through the training. So it looks like we're kind of a little bit in the middle of the scale today, I think, on the comfort here. Maybe that's a bit lower than where we were on Monday, if I remember, but hopefully we can help to move that forward, so no problem at all. Okay, so a second quick test for you, which comes back to one of the concepts that we talked about in the first part of the training, is a quick question to quiz you on one thing that we discussed. So I'll launch that question for you now. So the question will pop up in a second, and then you'll have around 20 seconds or so to answer, I think. So is the objective here equity or equality? If you remember, we did talk about both terms last time, but they had slightly different meanings. So see if you can remember what our overall objective is here, and then we'll go back to the slides just to recap that concept. Okay, a few more seconds to get your votes in, and then we'll have a look at the right answer. All right, so lots of you went with equality, which indeed was the right answer. So well done to those of you who got that right. A few of you selected equity, which was an important part of the equation. But let's go back now and have a quick look at that to recap on that concept. So if you recall, both of those elements form an important part of our overall equation here. But if you remember, we talked about how diversity, equity, and inclusion are all really important aspects of achieving equality. So diversity really being around having that seat at the boardroom in terms of representation. Equity being around ensuring that everyone has that ability to speak and is given the opportunity to get their voice across. And finally, inclusion, making people feel welcome and ensuring that they feel connected and integrated in a way that allows them to feel that they can really express their authentic selves. So we talk about that one as maybe being like the headset in the meeting that would allow us to interpret different languages and understand each other. And then I'm just going to recap a couple of quick points as well that we talked about. So firstly, we talked about the really important benefits that we can see both in society for achieving gender equality, but also specifically within companies as well. And we set out some of the research on that topic as well that you can refer to here to understand those areas better. We also introduced you to the women's empowerment principles from UN Women, which Tony talked us through, and Sarah joins us again today to recap and bring in that procurement aspect, which is one particular part that you'll see under Principle 5 there around supply chain. And we'll also come later today to the reporting side, which kind of talks about the aspects under Principle 7 of measurement and reporting as well. And then finally, if you'll remember, we talked about the real importance of corporate culture in ensuring a successful approach to advancing gender equality. We talked about that case study of our 2 fictitious companies, Owl Inc. and Peacock PLC, if you remember, and how they took different approaches with quite different outcomes in terms of their gender equality performance in their organizations. And if you remember, we recapped on some of these principles here that are really important to advance actions in a holistic and integrated way across your organizations. Okay, so with that, let's then transition into our new content for today and get started on our 3rd unit of the training, which looks at gender lens finance and the market mechanisms that are available that can support some of these principles that we talked about already in the training. So I'll pass you over to Landon, who's going to get us started on that.
Okay, great. Good morning again, everyone. Thanks again for joining us, and it's again good to be here with you. So to get us started, we're going to talk more about, as Fiona mentioned, implementation of gender equality, and we want to talk a bit about products that support market action, and then we'll also look at mechanisms that add value and promote gender equality across markets. So to start, let's look at how financial products are being used to support and advance gender equality and what opportunities lie within those financing mechanisms for gender-allied companies. This first chart I want to show you is looking at the trends in sustainable finance more broadly. So this is a chart not just on, for example, gender-focused or gender-themed products, but this chart is from a previous UNCTAD, that's UN Trade and Development, annual report, World Investment Report, and it shows that in 2024, you can see the number of sustainability themed bonds reaches across 7,500. And this did slow a little bit. You see a bit of a slowdown around 2021 to 2022. But it's still an increase, and then these funds are now worth 3.2 trillion USD. Just on that slight decrease in global investment flows to sustainable funds, it's important to also note that there was a number of different factors that led to this. There was some depressed asset values, investor withdrawals amid persistent market uncertainties like high inflation, rising interest rates, poor market returns, and looming risk of recessions in certain markets. As such, sustainability-themed funds remain an important tool to direct capital towards sustainable development. We're also seeing significant growth in gender lens investing. However, the data on gender lens investing is a bit more difficult to measure and capture. So we have less clear of an idea of the exact magnitude of funds that consider these factors. But last year, the SSE, alongside IFC and UN Women, did put out a report on gender-themed products, where we did a landscape analysis to see what gender-themed products were out there and existed. So there is some understanding of the size of the market. So we don't have enough time right now to dive into that topic, but we've provided you with some extra slides in your handout on exactly this. So please check out the slides if this topic is interesting to you. Now, to start, I just mentioned gender lens investing a couple of times. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with sustainable finance, but gender lens investing may be new to some of you. So let's take a moment to discuss that. If you could share in the chat, what do you think gender lens investing is? So if you don't know exactly, which might be lots of us on this call, that's okay. But if you could share what you think it is, or even if you don't want to, venture to a full definition, even if you just share a few words about what you think gender lens investing means. Okay, Denise notes investing with equality criteria. Okay, yeah, great. That's interesting. That criteria element is something we'll discuss more and more today as well. Ashna notes investing in companies that are pro-gender equality. Yeah, that's absolutely an element, perspective of gender equality. Yep, absolutely. Considering gender aspects. Yeah, that's great. Here, Philip notes an investment approach where you intentionally consider gender factors when making financial decisions, still aiming to make a profit. Okay. Lots of great answers coming in. Let's see. Investing with deliberate and measurable gender indicators. Okay, nice. I like that answer as well. The measurable gender indicators is a nice touch. Okay, lots of good answers coming in, but it seems like a lot of you have a good understanding. But to make sure we're all on the same page, we'll look at an official definition. And to note, there are, slightly differing definitions, but we think this one from the Global Impact Investing Network is a good place to start. So they define gender lens investing as investment strategies applied to an allocation or to the entirety of an investment portfolio, which seek to examine gender dynamics to better inform investment decisions and or intentionally and measurably address gender disparities. As the name gender investing makes clear, gender is a lens or a way of seeing things that helps an investor to highlight opportunity, illuminate risk, and understand strategy in a more nuanced way. So you might ask, how are investors using this gender lens to make investment decisions? And there's many different strategies. So some of the core strategies we see look specifically at what focus an investment strategy with a gender lens takes, but often we see a combination of multiple or all of these strategies to varying degrees. The most common strategy you might be familiar with is a focus on leadership. That's something we discussed a lot last session, right? Looking at corporate boards and things like this or CEOs. But there's other areas that we see investment strategies focusing on, like employees, supply chains, products and services, and community. Now, at the firm level, fund managers can drive the adoption of gender lens or gender smart investing by starting within their own investment house. Fund managers can strengthen the gender diversity of their own teams, for example, by the leadership setting clearer targets or building a respectful workplace culture or making public commitments to gender diversity. You may have heard about in the last couple of months, and I believe Fiji participated in the Ring the Bell event. That's a really good way to make a public commitment to gender diversity. With that, the IFC has developed a framework that we link to in this slide that includes designing a gender smart investment strategy, engaging, training, and rewarding people within the firm, enhancing or adapting investment processes and systems, and identifying and collaborating with partners and external stakeholders at the firm level. So now that was at the firm level again. So now we'll move to the portfolio level, and that's where fund managers can adopt strategies in both origination and portfolio management. So those strategies enable fund managers to allocate capital to companies that are committed to these 5 key areas you see here on your screen. So back to women's representation and leadership, perhaps as founders, co-founders, and in different senior management or leadership positions, a gender diverse and equitable workforce, a gender inclusive value chain. So going back a bit to what Sarah started discussing earlier in our session, and we'll come back to more, offering and designing products or services that consider the distinct needs of women and ensuring their operations do no harm to women in the community. So the good news is that as the benefits of gender diversity have become more widely recognized, those different benefits we discussed in our first session, the investor demand for gender smart investment opportunities has increased considerably, and this has led to the emergence of a variety of gender themed or gender focused financial products across different asset classes. To give a brief overview of the investment universe, we see on our screen here a quick look at how investment can be channeled towards gender equality and gender smart investments. On the left-hand side, we see these investment vehicles. So there's a few buckets in terms of the financial products that can be used to direct financial flows towards advancing gender equality. This includes equity-based financial products, debt or fixed income financial products, then also funds, and those can be debt or equity-based. And on the right-hand side, we can see that investors accessing these financial products also vary. So we see retail investors or individual investors, as well as institutional investors. So those bigger firms, for example, making use of the financing vehicles. It's important to note this because different investors have different needs and expectations of investments, which leads to a diversity of products as well to meet those different needs. For example, an institutional investor may have very different needs than a retail investor. Before we move into some case studies, I want to quickly take a moment to share about our publication from last year on gender-themed financial products that we did alongside IFC and UN Women and with the support of the government of Luxembourg. So this new report provided a global inventory and analysis of nearly 300 gender-themed financial instruments, including bonds, equity funds, and indices across both developed and emerging markets. I want to quickly mention a few key insights. So we saw that gender-themed financial products were a niche, but that isn't to say that they're not important, but it is still a niche yet growing segment of the global financial market. We also saw index and what we call market benchmark-based tools comprising a substantial share. Now, this was important because these indices and market benchmark-based tools are not investable products. So you or I or an institutional investor could not go and invest, $500,000 in this product. It's a financial product, but it doesn't get capital. So it helps to act as a knowledge product for investors. We also saw government-issued gender bonds are particularly prominent, more so in emerging markets versus developed markets. And we also saw gender-themed equity funds held relatively low asset values. So these gender-themed equity funds, like a mutual fund focused on gender, was in terms of all mutual funds, for example, held much lower asset values, perhaps $10 million, whereas an average mutual fund in the market might hold 100 million or 10x what that gender mutual fund holds. And we also saw there was inconsistent alignment with the Women's Empowerment Principles, or the WEPs. And we also saw the absence of standardized definitions, reporting frameworks, and taxonomies, which can contribute to substantial concerns about gender washing, or sometimes called pink washing, where gender labels may be used without demonstrating real impact. So you might know, in the last, let's say, 5 years, there's been more and more concern on the marketing of different sustainable finance products and different regulations. For example, I believe New Zealand has come forward recently with marketing regulations on sustainable finance products. But we're seeing a bit more of that attention now go to gender financial products as people start to get more concerned that these gender-themed financial products might be mislabeled or not doing exactly what they claim to be doing. So with that, the report urges greater integration of gender equality into sustainable finance taxonomies, stronger verification mechanisms, and alignment with the WEPs and SDG 5 to ensure that gender-themed investments are delivering meaningful outcomes and actually advancing gender equality as they should be. Now let's look at some case studies that can help us better understand some examples of gender products. This first case study here is from Gold Standard, the gender responsive carbon credits. This is the Longo Safe Water Project in Uganda, which is a really good example of how climate and gender benefits can work together and in tandem. And in 2020, this was the first ever project to receive the Gold Standard Gender Responsive certification. This project rehabilitates boreholes and provides clean drinking water to 40,000 people and cuts 50,000 tons of CO2 annually. The social impact here is where the project stands out as well. So households are saving 4 hours a week on water collection, and this time gained back is almost exclusively by women and girls. As in this community before the project, women and girls bore the responsibility for collecting water. The Water Resource Committee also has almost reached parity. So you're seeing women being having their voices heard in terms of the leadership of the committee. And most strikingly, reported domestic violence related to water collection has dropped from 35% to zero. And almost every woman surveyed is now using the saved time on water collection for income generating activities. So they're getting some financial power in the system as well, as they're able to now generate income, whereas before that time was spent, of course, collecting water. It's important to understand that while Gold Standard requires all projects to be gender sensitive, this project specifically went a step further to become gender responsive. This means that they move beyond just doing no harm to actively setting targets that reduce inequality. So, for anyone looking to buy credits, this project offers high integrity carbon reductions that are also rigorously vetted for verified social impact. There's one more example on bonds, but we'll leave that for your own time. That's about IFC and their Banking on Women program, and I recommend checking out the IFC's Banking on Women website, as there's a number of great examples and resources. But in the interest of time, we'll keep going, and I'll turn it over to Fiona to dive a bit deeper into what it means to list or invest in gender bonds.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Landon. So, yeah, moving on now to the topic of gender bonds in particular. So, we're going to have a little bit of a look at what this type of bond is and how that can be used. So, to get us started, I will introduce broadly the concept of bonds and where gender bonds sit in the market before I pass over to Guillaume from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, who's going to give us some more details on this. So, firstly, just starting with the basics, if you're not familiar with what a bond is a fixed income investment product which is issued by a government or a corporation to raise funding. So, at the end of a predetermined period, the bond issuer, so that's the company or the government looking for investment, will repay the investors with interest in additional to the original value of that bond. And then sustainability bonds are bonds that are designed to finance or refinance environmental or social projects. And then when we move to gender bonds more specifically, these will be a subset of that broader type of bonds within the green, social, and sustainability bond universe. So gender bonds currently are often not necessarily seen as a specific category of bonds themselves, like we might see for green bonds, which maybe you've heard about. But increasingly, we are starting to see bonds that have a gender focus, either by setting distinct KPIs related to gender, or perhaps by linking to projects that can support or enhance gender equality. And what we also want to highlight here is that we do see a large overlap as well between green bonds, which are focused perhaps on climate or environmental objectives, and the co-benefits for gender equality, as we already heard about in that case study that Landon shared with us from the Gold Standard as well in that project. And so, what are the trends in this space? Well, if we look at the debt markets, we can see here that there overall has been growth in sustainable finance through social bonds in around the last 5 years or so. So, this data comes from the UNCTAD's World Investment Report again and shows that the cumulative global issuance for sustainable bonds reached over $1 trillion in 2024. So, although you can see here that we've seen some declines since 2020, this was found to be in line with the broader overall bond market. So, overall, though, it's clear that we are seeing that social and mixed sustainability bonds are on a longer term growth trajectory, with a 19% increase in issuance since 2019 to 2024. And so, whilst you might, as I say, have already heard about green bonds, we can see that specifically since 2020 as well, we've seen that growth in sustainable and social bonds as well, which now account for around a third of the total sustainable bond market. So, how do we know what we class as a gender bond? Well, we'll go into this more in a moment, but just to introduce a number of the guidelines that can be used to help us determine here what would qualify as a gender bond. So you can use this guidance both as an investor if you're looking to invest in such areas, but also if you're looking to create products for investment as a company as well. So we have the social bond principles, which provide guidelines for issuing social bonds, And then the Climate Bonds Initiative have also developed a methodology relating to whether bonds can be included in their social and sustainability bond database, which may also be interesting to take a look at here. But I think what's really important to highlight about this type of guidance is that it's really designed to help build trust in the market and to ensure that those social bonds are designed to achieve the real outcomes that they are claiming to try and achieve. So, of course, it's not just okay to brand something as a gender equality bond, but we really need to understand what the impact is that it's trying to achieve and to be able to measure whether we achieve that. So that gives us just a bit of an introduction to this topic more generally, but we're very pleased to be joined by someone far more specialised on this topic than I. We have Guillaume Jacques, who is a sustainable finance analyst at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, joining us here today. So a big thank you for being here, Guillaume, and I'll pass the floor over to you for your presentation.
Thank you very much for having me today, Fiona. And yes, I'm working in the Luxembourg Stock Exchange in the Green Exchange team and also very active in all gender-related topics here at the exchange. I think we can deep dive directly into it. I will share my screen and explain to you what are gender-focused bonds. Here we are. Okay, so what are gender-focused bonds? So it really started to gain traction with this document, which was published in 2021 by UN Women, IFC, and ECMA, which is the Practitioner's Guide to Using Sustainable Debt for Gender Equality. And this document serves purposes both for issuers and also for investors. And first, for issuers, it supports new and existing bond issuers, but also all the stakeholders which are active in a bond issuance to integrate gender equality objectives into sustainable investments. Regarding investors, it helps them to understand, but also to support projects which are linked to gender equality objectives. And this is really a guide, a practical guide, which provides illustrative examples of both use of proceeds, but also key performance indicators and SPTs for the sustainability linked bonds, which we will explain a bit later in the slides. So there are two types of gender-focused bonds, the first one being use of proceeds bonds and the second one being sustainability-linked bonds. If we start with use of proceeds bonds, so these are green, social, or sustainability bonds, as it was mentioned by Fiona just earlier. And how do we assess if use of proceeds bonds are gender-focused at the exchange? So there are two cases. The first one being if each category in the pre-issuance documentation, so the framework, SPO and so on, if each category is directed towards gender equality objectives, so the Sustainable Development Goal number 5, then in that case, we already know and we can already label the bond as gender-focused. And the second case is if the bond finances a lot of different projects. So let's say different categories like renewable energy, clean transportation, education, and one of these categories is linked to gender. Then we will have to wait probably 1 year for the post-issuance report to be displayed, to be published. And in this report, we will verify that at least a significant portion of the proceeds were used towards gender equality. If this is the case, then the bond can be labeled as gender-focused bond. Now going to SLBs, so sustainability-linked bonds. First of all, what are they? So it's any bond for which financial characteristics are linked to specific sustainability or ESG targets. So if we take an example if we look at the bottom left, let's say that at the issue date there is one KPI and one SPT which are established. Let's say the KPI is the number of women in the board of directors, and the target could be, for example, to reach 40% of women in the board by 2030, let's say. Then at the observation date, which would be 2030 in that case, we can assess if the target was missed or met. If the target is missed, there could be a penalty mechanism. What could that be? So, for example, the interest paid to investor could be increased, so the cost for the issuer increases. So, if they miss the SPT, if they miss the target to reach 40% of women in the board, they could pay more interest, for example. But that could also go the other side. If they meet the target, then in that case, the coupon, so the interest, could also go down. So it could be less costly for the issuer of the bond. This is just one example of penalty mechanism with the coupon rate, but there could be also an increase in the redemption price. There could be donations, and so on and so on. So there are multiple penalty mechanisms which are applicable. And how do we assess if an SLB is gender-focused bond at the exchange? We look if there is at least one KPI and thus one SPT which targets SDG 5. And in that case, it can be labeled as gender-focused. After these explanations, we can go towards case studies. So the first one would be about the use of proceeds gender-focused bond. And for this, I have a small video, an interview of Aziz Shasha, which is the treasurer of NMB Bank, which is a commercial bank in Tanzania. And I will quickly show you this video.
It's a commercial bank, universal commercial bank, based in Tanzania, East Africa, that serves retail clients, corporate clients, and government. I'm the treasurer for the bank. So main responsibility really is around mobilizing funds. So liquidity management, foreign exchange risk management, interest risk management, and coordination, just to make sure that there's balance sheet optimization and as well as capital allocation. So our gender bond really is a use of proceeds bond, that we issued in line with the international capital markets principles under the social bonds framework that allows us to raise money from the public and finance, women-owned businesses or enterprises that are dominantly owned by women, or businesses whose products and services actually eventually, service the female. Women proposition is a very important segment for our bank. And yes, we had a very fantastic proposition for women's savings, but we realized on the financing side, we needed to do something to mobilize additional funding to support growth for women-owned businesses. So we felt it was necessary for us, because a strategic fit for us is really to diversify portfolio. And given the risk profile of women as far as loans is concerned, we realized that the non-performing loans ratios are actually lower than that of the male counterparts. Yes, so the projects we tend to finance, or that we're financing with these, are predominantly female-owned enterprises, and it cuts across different sectors, be it renewable energy, agriculture, health, education, and manufacturing as well. Obviously, it would be interesting that we measure the number of new loans that are issued to MSCs, so micro to medium and small enterprises women. But also it would be interesting for us, and we're doing that, to measure what impact that is having on their social and economic life. So how many jobs are created? Are they growing? Are they not? Are they expanding their businesses? I think those kind of metrics are very important, and it's part of our KPIs in ensuring that these funds actually put to the right use. Indeed, we've issued other types of bonds, retail bonds, corporate bonds. The difference with this gender bond is that the use of proceeds requires a lot of transparency. Investors require that you go back to them to tell them, how these funds have been used. But in addition to that, it has to go in line with, the social bond principles and in line with the international capital markets, principle on social bonds. As opposed to the other bonds that you could simply raise and finance all manner of activities, without accountability to the investors. This requires significant accountability and transparency as far as investors are concerned. It was very well received by investors, domestic investors, and as well as international investors. As a matter of fact, it got 197% oversubscription. So we had significant appetite seeing from international financiers, but as well as domestic retail and corporate investors. I think one obvious one was the misconception, that you have a gender bond in the market, financing women, and therefore there was a perception that perhaps the bond subscribers were meant to be female, and so it requires a lot of efforts, marketing efforts, to ensure that the male counterparts actually understood that it's not just for female, but they could also invest to help advance female. So that was a key challenge for us. But the other one is obviously data quality, especially in some of these emerging markets, still remains to be an issue. So you need to capture the right data at onboarding stage becomes very important, because you really get to realize how critical that is when you're doing your impact measurement and reporting. But the other aspect is the opportunities are still huge. The financing gap for female generally is still quite huge, and that is why. That is why there's need for us perhaps also to consider scaling up, such insurances, going forward. Yes, just related to the previous question. So we realize we need to do more still, so certainly we need to raise more funding, be it domestically, be it partnering with DFIs or developing financial institutions, to just make sure that we can scale up, that portfolio. The need is there. I think we need to answer a very critical question of affordability, which keeps coming up, and hopefully using things like guarantee schemes from some of these development financial institutions will enable us actually affordably extend credit to female entrepreneurs. I think critical for me, again, back to what I've said, is data, at the onboarding stage. You need to get it right. But at the same time, just ensuring that indeed you have a pipeline sufficient enough to be covered whatever amount of bonds you want to raise, because ultimately investors demand, that level of transparency and accountability to see that the bonds are actually put to the intended use.
Okay, so this was for the social bond of NME Bank, and we will actually explain a bit more about it. Just get back my slides. Okay. So this was a bond which was issued in 2022 and actually dually listed both in Tanzania and on SGX. It was listed in Luxembourg in March 2023. And so, as he mentioned, the proceeds of the bonds were usually used towards loans to women MSMEs. And actually, over 2,000 women MSMEs benefited from the proceeds of this bond. And this was really well received by investors, as he mentioned, with an oversubscription of 197%. And also, it's really worth to mention that the use of proceeds was very relevant in that case, as 75% of women struggle to obtain access to finance in Tanzania. So yes, the proceeds were really useful in that case. And now going to case study for an SLB. So this is a bond from EQT Group, which is a global investment firm, with headquarters located in Sweden. And so for SLBs, they must have KPIs and SPTs. In that case, they had 3 KPIs and thus 3 SPTs, and 2 of them were linked to women and to gender equality overall. You can see them on the left. So the first one being women investment advisory professionals. So to increase the share of women to 28% by 2026 versus 21% in 2020, which was the baseline. And the second KPI, which is women independent board members appointed at certain EQT portfolio companies. And to the SPTs to increase the share of women to 36% by 2026 versus 21% in 2020, which was the baseline. And if these SPTs are not met in 2026, then in that case, there would be a coupon step up of the interest. So the interest would be increased. So the amount paid to investors would be increased in that case. So the issuer, if they miss the target, would pay more to investors, and it would be more costly for it. This was also very well received by investors, and yes, we can see that some SLBs could be really linked to women, and there can be multiple KPIs which are linked to gender equality and thus SDG 5. And I guess that's it for me. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. And we also have one study which we released with 2X Global in September 2025, which can be really useful in that case.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Guillaume, for that. Really appreciate it. I think that gives us an excellent overview on the topic. I'm just checking. I don't think I see any questions at this point in time, so I think we're good. But big thanks for your presentation.
Thank you too.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, we'll just round off this section and we'll come up to our break shortly. So a few more segments just to talk about. So firstly, we've talked there around the product side of things. And now we're going to move on to talk about promotion of investment products. So at the SSE, we've done some research looking at this topic and working with exchanges to understand how they're already taking action to enhance gender equality. And there are really two main ways that we saw markets working on gender equality. Firstly, through the promotion of women's participation, and secondly, through the promotion of impact. So let's start with promoting participation. So what we saw here is that both on the sell side and the buy side, we've seen the application of a gender lens in global markets, helping to access unserved segments of the market. So on the sell side, so that's the firms that are creating, promoting, or selling financial products, we're seeing markets promoting and supporting women-led businesses or female entrepreneurs. For example, we have the Sourcing to Equal project, which is led by IFC in partnership with the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative and the Government of Norway. And that aims to connect 5,000 women entrepreneurs to new markets via corporate procurement. And then on the buy side, so that's the institutions that are managing money and buying securities to generate returns, we can see that investment in and support of women traders is growing as well. And so this relates back to when we talked about the fact that gender lens investment strategies can be both at the portfolio level, but also within the investment firm. Because it's really been well documented that all male investment teams indeed are likely to invest in fewer women-led businesses as well. And one example of this type of promotion is an annual women-focused investment summit, which is run by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange called JSE She Invests. So in addition to providing a networking opportunity for women, the event covers a variety of topics, including finance and investment literacy, and also showcases different ways in which women can invest in the market as well. And so I mentioned the other side there being around promoting impact. And so we also saw in our study that exchanges and markets are promoting financial products and companies based on their gender equality related impact. So how much they're actively contributing towards gender equality, either within individual organizations or in society more broadly as well. And so we've seen things happening here, like the promotion of listed financial products through awards or incentives, really with the objectives of sharing a spotlight on those that are having a positive impact. We also see that markets are starting to create particular segments or indices that are making it easier to find and invest in these types of stocks or financial products. And so, for example, this could take the form of particular indices focused on gender equality. So you see two examples here from Euronext and from Bloomberg of the types of indices that could exist and the different categories of information that they are considering as part of these indices. And so I think what's useful to take from this if you're a company is to get an idea of the sorts of information you might be looking to collect and disclose to support your inclusion in these types of indices. And you can see here, although there are some differences in the specifics between these two indices, broadly speaking, they're looking for quite similar types of information. And I think what this also shows as well is the importance of collecting holistic data across different activities within the organization to get a complete understanding of how it's performing on gender equality. So, whilst we often start by looking at those top line leadership metrics around the representation of women in the workforce, of course, if we want to really understand and take action across the organization, we need to be looking at all of these types of factors regarding equal pay, the different policies and practices that the organization has in place as well. Okay, so I think that wraps us up quite well on this section. But just to finish off, we'll have a poll question for you now, which is just to wrap up and ask, why do you think overall it is that investors are looking for gender-related opportunities? And you can select multiple options here if you have more than one that you think is correct. So let us know which of these you think might be reasons that investors are looking at this topic. So is it for higher financial performance, maybe to access untapped markets, to enhance climate-related investment impacts, to prevent men from accessing leadership positions, diversifying their portfolios, or perhaps managing gender-related risks? So I think, let's see, we've had 22% or 24% take part so far. It's always nice to get as many of you taking part in the polls and mentees as possible. So no marks for getting this wrong here. So feel free to take a guess if you're not sure what the right answers are. But it's good to have a little think as we're working through the training and reflect on what you think about it as well. Okay, I'll give you maybe 5 more seconds and then we'll have a look at the answers. Okay, so we'll end the poll there and I'll share the results. So we looks like we had a kind of spread of answers here, but indeed, I think a lot of you got this right. A lot of these indeed are valid answers. The only one indeed that we would highlight as not being correct here is that fourth option around preventing men from accessing leadership positions. I think we've heard through the case studies and what Guillaume shared with us there, a lot of those drivers that companies might have about financial performance, accessing untapped markets, managing risks, etc. But also we've heard about the co-benefits with climate change that exist on many projects. But indeed, of course, that option on preventing men is not really the aim here, because whilst gender-based investing might sometimes be viewed with a bit of suspicion by some, because it might prevent men from moving forward so that women could instead, of course, that's not the objective of gender lens investing. So if that is the outcome that's occurring, then of course something's not being done correctly here. And that's something that needs to be addressed in the approach to ensure we have the right outcomes. Okay, thanks everyone for that. So that brings us up now to our quick break. So similar to last time, I'm going to start the timer for you. We'll take a 5-minute break, so feel free to grab a drink or get up from your desk and stretch. If you have any questions as well on the content that we've talked about so far, we'd encourage you to put those into the Q&A box as well, and we'll come back to you on those in the Q&A. But thanks everyone, and we'll take our 5-minute break now.
Okay, well, we'll get started again. I know that's a short break, but hopefully at least there's enough time to grab a cup of tea or coffee or stretch your legs a little bit. So, with that, we will now take a look at some of the financial instruments available to promote and advance gender equality, and we'll look at how an organization can communicate their performance on gender equality, which can be one means of accessing these gender-specific financing mechanisms that we discussed in the first part. However, this is not only important for communicating with investors your impact, but also internal communication is key to ensure that the culture change that we repeated so many times on Monday and again this morning, which is a necessary aspect of performance, that this culture change actually takes place. So this is our final unit of the training, and it has two main sections. We'll talk about communication and transparency within your organization, among the employees, as well as with external stakeholders outside of your organization. And to start, we'll take a look at how you can manage communication with your suppliers, so in your supply chain. Well, there's many methods used to enhance transparency within an organization. What we want to highlight today is the concept of gender responsive procurement, or GRP, as a tool for advancing gender equality, not just in your own organization, but in the broader marketplace as well. To guide us on this, our colleague from UN Women, who you saw already today, Sarah, she'll discuss a bit more about the tools provided by the WEPS team and UN Women to support you on this topic. Sarah, great to see you, and thanks again for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Landon. And yes, I was very eager to talk to this room earlier, so I hijacked the introduction, but here back to discuss a bit more in depth how to communicate with the external stakeholders, in particular, how to communicate with your suppliers. So I think we're going to use the same a parallel to what we talked about earlier in terms of utilizing a gender lens. Imagine wearing new glasses to it and looking at outward. So early on, 2 days ago, my colleague Tony talked about principles that can be embedded in the organization, looking inward, looking at how the organization performs internally. But here we're looking at how going beyond the workplace and advancing gender equality in your marketplace. So this is about how the WEPS Secretariat encourages companies to engage with their suppliers. And when people hear the word supplier engagement, they often associate with compliance and requirements. But today we want to take a different angle, which is how we engage with suppliers. So the supplier engagement on gender equality, it is critical because a company's impact extends far beyond its operations, and it goes into the value chain. So by promoting gender equality among suppliers, a business can strengthen suppliers' performance, ensure their compliance with the law, and build more resilient, inclusive value chains, as I mentioned earlier. So in doing so, they turn shared values into measurable impact. And in this way, we have a double materiality. So we benefit both business and society. Supplier engagement is about partnership, support, and mutual benefit. Company that can set the tone by clearly communicating expectations, assessing where suppliers stand, and providing practical tools, incentives, and support to help them improve. When we talk about gender responsive procurement, or GRP at WEPS, we mean fostering a gender responsive ecosystem. So we encourage and guide WEPS signatories to systematically source their goods and services from other enterprises that align with WEPS. When WEPS signatory purchases from other WEPS signatories, then they can multiply their impact on gender equality. They enhance the supplier diversity, and they reduce systemic discrimination. So just to give you an example, today, if we look globally, approximately 1 into 3 SMEs are owned by women. But public and private procurement for women-owned business is only 1%. So we can really advance equality in a very concrete way by buying from women-owned businesses. And of course, we can multiply our impact when we do from other companies that embed and embrace gender equality in their operations. Next slide, please. So before we engage and communicate with suppliers, it's important to understand where your company stands when it comes to gender responsive procurement. So at UN Women, we have a gender responsive procurement assessment tool, which is available to WEPS signatories, and it serves to assess progress on your GRP policies and practices. So this tool helps companies to advance gender equality in their marketplace by providing the opportunity to assess if the company's procurement policies and practices are gender responsive. So we have been encouraging our signatories to take it, and even further, they can encourage their suppliers to take it to create a whole of society impact into the ecosystem. Looking at this GRP assessment, as I said, this is available to WEPS signatories. So make sure you sign up if you haven't done it yet. And how is it made? It comprises of 31 questions covering 5 main themes, namely gender equality commitments, policy, procurement policy and strategy, internal procurement and supply chain management, supplier database and data reporting, supplier engagement, and diversification. So based on the data that you provide, you will receive a scorecard, which will highlight the gaps and the areas for improvement, similar to what we explained earlier with Tony on the gender gap analysis tool. And you'll have also a sort of maturity journey from beginner to improver and from achiever to leader. The data that you enter is strictly confidential. It's a self-assessment, and it will never be shared or divulged to public. Next slide, please. So just as developing a gender action plan, consultations and communication is key. So you need to listen to your internal stakeholders and ask questions to your suppliers. And this is what we meant when we talked about communication. So you need to secure, number one, you need to secure companies-wide commitment and support. And communicate internally on your company's GRP maturity level and goals. So the best way to do this is to use specific numbers, targets, and time frame, and seek support. Number two, ensure diverse teams and build their capacity. It's important to ensure that also your procurement team is on board with gender equality and understands gender responsive procurement. The diversity of the team is also about having both women and men buyers that might understand diverse suppliers. Number three, set performance target and track results. Based on your assessment result, create an action plan with specific targets and then monitor and track those targets. Number four, map suppliers. This is where external communication comes in. Map your suppliers, learn more about them. Is it a WEPS signatory? It is owned by women. And finally, engage with the current and future suppliers to adopt WEPS and help build their capacity. So after you have mapped your suppliers, engage with them, and you can even help them understand the importance of being part of this movement. Next slide, please. In 2023, we have conducted a global pilot with a group of watch and jewelry companies to test the GRP assessment tool. Also, in our 2025 WEPS survey, we saw that expanding gender equality initiatives into the marketplace is becoming increasingly a priority for companies. But yet, it remains one of the biggest challenges. So some of the challenges and the existing gaps are around gathering sex disaggregated data on their suppliers, the fact that the GRP is not yet integrated as the core business strategy, and so lack of KPIs to track progress. Having identified these gaps and challenges, we have developed a set of recommendations that can be useful to those companies that are starting this journey. So here are the recommendations. One, develop a standalone gender-responsive procurement strategy, policy, and action plan with the clear indicators and target. Make sure that you consult your internal stakeholders and external stakeholders, including your suppliers. Secondly, related to the first point, ensure effective support in GRP implementation and monitoring progress, including surveys and consultations. Number three, empower employees through GRP training, enlightening them about business rationale, like I did at the beginning, why this matters, and guiding them towards tangible and concrete steps in reshaping current practices. And actively seek out for women in procurement roles, including influential managerial and executive procurement positions. Fourth, collect sex disaggregated data and report regularly on progress made. This transparency could serve as a linchpin to propel advancement on gender equality. And finally, engage suppliers on gender equality and women's empowerment. Encourage them to sign the WEPs. Encourage them to build their capacity. And when the time comes, report on their progress on gender equality and women's empowerment. Thank you very much. I hope this session has inspired you to go back to your companies, take this important step towards advancing gender equality through gender-responsive procurement. Just imagine the impact that you can have for your company, for your suppliers, and your business community, and for society as large. You are now just an action away to become a GRP pioneer. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. We really appreciate that helpful overview on the gender responsive procurement, the tool, and providing some really useful action steps that here everyone on the call can take. So thank you again for that. And now that we've covered engaging suppliers through gender responsive procurement, we're going to continue on to communicating more widely to other external stakeholders. To kick this off, we'll do a quick Zoom poll to see how your organizations are currently disclosing gender-related information. So if you give me one moment, I'll launch that now. Oh, thank you. So we're curious, does your company currently disclose gender-related information through one or more of these mechanisms? So does your company disclose through a CSR, ESG, or sustainability report? Does your company disclose gender-related information in an annual financial report, perhaps, or through a gender pay gap report, perhaps all of the above, none of the above, or maybe you're not sure currently? And feel free, as you're filling this in, let us know in the chat, what do you think determines where gender-related information should appear? So if you're someone who already has an idea of where you think gender-related information should be disclosed, feel free to put in the chat, what factor are you looking for to decide if, for example, information should appear in an annual financial reporting package, maybe using the ISSB disclosure standards, or maybe you think it should be a sustainability report, perhaps using the GRI standards. I see a couple of folks putting in 2. Okay, so some folks are saying 1 and 2. Shivneel notes annual report is the best place for wider stakeholder consumption. Okay, interesting. Okay, some good answers coming through, and we're going to end the poll there. And you can see results here. So a lot of folks were putting annual financial report. So that's currently where a lot of a lot of you and your companies are disclosing gender-related information. And then the second most used is a CSR, ESG, or sustainability report. But a big difference between that annual financial report, only a couple folks noted you're disclosing gender-related information in a gender pay gap report. Pardon me. And then a few of you noted your companies are using all of the above. Far more are using none of the above, and some of you are not sure. If you're currently not sure, I definitely recommend after today's session to look into this a little bit more to see where that information is currently being disclosed. Okay. So now we want to explain a bit about where and how to disclose. So who you communicate to defines where you report and what standard you will use. So this highlights, I believe, on Shivneel's point about, what stakeholder segment you want to focus on. So report to investors, the primary location for your gender-related disclosures will be in your annual report. The ISSB has consolidated the major investor-oriented sustainability disclosure standards, and for reporting to other stakeholders, you may want to use the GRI standards, which are widely used by organizations globally as well. And then together, these can form a holistic reporting package to a broad range of stakeholders. In terms of the content for each type of, excuse me, for each type of audience, for investors, you might want to focus your disclosure on financially material related risks and opportunities related to gender equality, as well as any other information that can help investors in their investment decisions and engagement with the company. As I said, this would go into your annual report alongside your financial statements and other disclosures. To communicate to this broader stakeholder group, you would report more about the impact of your business on the environment, social, and economy at large, as this will be more in line with what they would want to know. At the same time, this information will also be useful to some of your investors and support the information you reported already in your annual financial report. To report to investors in this annual financial report, the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards, also known as the ISSB standards, requires your organization to disclose across 4 broad areas, which you might already recognize if you were previously familiar with the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD. So the ISSB S1 standard requires an entity to disclose information about all sustainability-related risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect the entity's cash flows, its access to finance, or cost of capital over short, medium, or the long term. To note, the ISSB does not yet provide specific metrics or disclosure requirements on gender equality, but they do highlight that companies should make use of the SASB standards and GRI standards to identify appropriately the disclosures related to sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Now, going back to GRI, or multi-stakeholder reporting, the SSE, we went through GRI standards and we identified those that most directly address gender equality, hopefully to help you know where to find guidance on gender equality disclosures for your sustainability reports. So we see here 4 different key elements. So gender-related disclosures are part of disclosures on the employees, where it's broken down by gender and region, the governance structure and composition, the policy commitments, the approach to stakeholder engagement as well. And we include here the references to the particular sections of the GRI2 standard on the slide, where you'll be able to find more further information on those disclosures. Next, as well with GRI, we have GRI 400. So GRI transitioned to a modular structure with the Universal Standards 2021, and then topic standards like GRI 405, which is on diversity and equal opportunity, and GRI 406 on non-discrimination still remain central to reporting on those specific topics. So organizations are now required to report their management approach on both of those topics following the requirements of GRI 3, Material Topics 2021. This is to help ensure a consistent format for describing how an entity identifies and manages its impacts. Additionally, and I know this is a lot of different standards and numbers being thrown at you, which is why I always recommend looking back at the slides after to refresh yourself and ensure you understand all the different standards. But additionally, under GRI 202-1, organizations must disclose the ratios of standard entry-level wages by gender compared to the local minimum wage, providing a quantitative look at gender pay equity at the start of the employment cycle. Now, as mentioned, I know that's a lot of kind of nitty-gritty of the standards, and that's why I always find it's helpful to discuss some examples where we actually see how companies are using different standards and how they're disclosing in the real world. So these examples are just excerpts from annual reports. They only present a piece of a bigger, complete picture. So they're examples of current practice, and we're not casting or passing judgment on them today as to whether they're good or bad practices. So first, let's look at this governance disclosure from the annual report of Airtel Africa, a Nigerian telecommunications company. In line with what the IFRS sustainability disclosure standards, they reported the processes they use to monitor, manage, and oversee their sustainability reported performance. So they're using the ISSB standards. And then they noted that the non-financial performance KPIs linked in their sustainability strategy includes gender diversity. So you see gender balance here highlighted as a strategic KPI. And then in the governance report, they also go into further detail on the specific initiatives and actions overseen by the board and the board's committees in the reporting year. For example, the role of the nominations committee in reviewing executive remuneration. They also note that these KPIs are linked to the board's remuneration, which I always say is a very strong incentive for leadership to take this seriously. Next, we want to review an example disclosure on strategy. And strategy disclosures aim to help the readers of your report understand your strategy for managing sustainability-related risks and opportunities. And here we see a sustainability report of Astra International. Astra International is an Indonesian conglomerate, and Astra here outlines the importance of diversity of its employees to its success. Importantly, the statement is then backed up by the roadmap you see here on your screen, and other actions to manage the opportunity they see through a more gender diverse workforce. Alongside this, Astra also goes into further details about how the company is implementing this, for example, through programs to make the workplace more suitable to women. And then they also have a women's leaders development program and also a women's network program, which is for the wider workforce, not just for their company, Astra International. I want to point out something interesting. They say that human capital development covers 3 focus areas, which are to build an agile organization, develop passionate and energetic leaders, and this is so as to be able to navigate the organization in facing business challenges, as well as carrying out the culture of continuous improvement and innovation to maintain their relevancy in an era of disruptions. In other words, Astra is saying that a more diverse and gender equal business can help them maintain the company's relevancy in this era of disruptions. So that's an interesting insight into their strategic approach to gender equality. The next example we have is on risk management. Here we're looking at the French cosmetic company L'Oréal, their annual report, which is prepared in alignment with the ESRS, that's the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. As a reminder, risk management disclosures are intended to help the reader of a report understand your processes to identify, assess, prioritize, and monitor sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Here, L'Oreal provides an overview of how they go about identifying their material risks, opportunities, and they use a double materiality lens. So that includes the financial or investor materiality perspective of the ISSB alongside the materiality perspective, which considers the impacts of issues on society and the broader environment. In this disclosure, you can see they explain the process they used to identify and assess material impacts, or sorry, maybe material topics and their impacts. They include specific issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as the stakeholder groups they consulted for that process. And then for each subtopic you see here on your screen, they're all related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then they identify the policies and action plans. So you see that in the fourth column under action plans. And those are the actions in place to manage that risk or that impact area for the subtopic. The next example we have, our final example here, is a disclosure on metrics and targets. This is Cemex, a Mexican multinational cement company. Cemex also stated in their annual report that they're a signatory to the UN WEPs and also the UN Global Compact's target gender equality. And then they're also EDGE certified. As mentioned, we'll be hearing more from EDGE certification shortly. In this example, we see here Cemex updating on the progress being made towards gender equality in their workforce. To note, Cemex is in an industry that is traditionally quite male-dominated, and therefore it's starting from a lower percentage of women than perhaps a company from another industry that may be more traditionally female-dominated. For example, like our L'Oreal example, which is in a traditionally more female-dominated industry. This example does, however, show that any business can take action towards gender equality. Cemex set a new goal to increase the representation of women in senior management positions. Here they specify this base year of 2022, their target being 30% women in senior management positions, and their target year of 2030. Later on in the report, they also report on metrics like percentage of workforce by gender, percentage of female employees by position, and the women to men remuneration ratio by region. With that, those are really good examples of sex disaggregated metrics that can help Cemex and their stakeholders better understand their progress towards overall long-term goal to increase women's representation in the organization in line with that 2030 target I mentioned. On this topic of metrics and disclosures, we recently released a new report that provides the first comprehensive comparative assessment of gender-related disclosure metrics issued by stock exchanges and standard setters worldwide, like ESRS, ISSB, and GRI. This market monitor provides an analysis of the gender equality disclosure metrics recommended by stock exchanges and corporate reporting standard setters. This analysis provides benchmarking of these metrics against the Women's Empowerment Principles, or the WEPs. And then it also includes recommendation for improvement in the quality and scope of gender disclosure metrics, because we found some inconsistencies in the inconsistencies in the metrics recommended by these different exchanges and corporate reporting standard setters. And then we provide the recommendations to improve the quality and scope of gender equality disclosure metrics based on roundtables with standard setters and other institutions. So I encourage you to take a minute or two to check this report out. I also want to mention some other disclosure guidelines to consider. So we discussed a lot of different standards, but there's also additional organizations that you can look to for more guidance on this topic. So there's the guiding principles for you to consider, like the UN Charter of Human Rights, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We've discussed SDG 5 a lot, of course, as well as the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, which again, of course, we've discussed lots over Monday and today's session. But in addition, it's always important to know what disclosures are required of your organization by law. Beyond this, there's also many rankings or benchmarks to consider, such as those of the World Benchmarking Alliance. And then there's also different indices and rating agencies that take into account the social performance of companies. So we mentioned before a comparison of a couple methodologies from Equileap and Bloomberg. So this provides an overview of some of those disclosure guidelines you can consider. But we previously also talked about standards and certifications that can be used to develop your organization's gender equality practices and internal processes. These are referred to as performance management standards, which can help guide industry practice and enhance your organization's performance on gender. So one example is the ISO 26000, that's guidance on social responsibility, and gender equality is also present in many other ISO standards. There's also the SDG impact standards, which are management practice standards designed to guide businesses and investors to embed sustainability into their decision-making approach. Finally, one such set of standards that's very relevant for gender equality is the EDGE certification, which we've mentioned a couple times in our first session. But today we're happy to have David Pritchett here with us, the Managing Director of EDGE Certified Foundation, to tell us more about EDGE certification and its importance in the gender equality space. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, David.
Sorry, David, just to flag you're muted.
So I'm doing too many things at the same time, sharing my screen, sharing my video.
No problem.
Thanks, Fiona. Thanks, Lannan, for the overview. Really exhaustive, as always, overview of the different reporting standards, frameworks, guidelines, directives, as we've got now in Europe, up and coming. There's so much out there. It can be a little bit overwhelming, I think, for organizations to see which framework suits their needs best. I don't think it needs to be obviously a one size fits all. I think it's a case of looking at different frameworks and guidelines and standards for different purposes. And I think that's, you've set that out really well, where a stock exchange or where an organization wants to align to reporting standards. There's lots of guidance that you've put out together with your partners on what those standards are and what the stock exchanges themselves are pushing for in terms of disclosure standards or reporting standards. And they're converging a little bit globally, which is nice. So it gives an element of comparability. Then you've got, as you said, the rankings and the frameworks, and you've got also the performance standards. And EDGE certification is one of those performance standards. It's very niche, and it looks at the performance of organization in talent management. So gender equality in talent management systems, in career pipelines. How do women thrive in an organization, and what does it take, and how do you measure the success and the impact of how women thrive, and men, obviously, both genders thrive within the organization. And so I'll take you through a little bit the overview of how EDGE works. Some of you may have come across EDGE. It's an ecosystem where we have a foundation which sets standards, guidelines, which are standards which align very well with many of the other standards that we've talked about. They go a little bit deeper, so they're very connected to the UN Women empowerment principles that you've gone through in detail. 4 of those are very aligned to the EDGE standards, but we go much more deeper into understanding the gender representation through the different value drivers of gender equality in the workplace, and I'll come to that in a minute. We work with EDGE Strategy, a commercial partner, and a licensed partner, the IFC, who is obviously a big partner of this whole training program with the UNSSE. The IFC uses the EDGE certification as an assessment framework to support their capacity building work in the markets that they work. So many of you may be working with the IFC, or maybe wanting to work with the IFC, or maybe planning to work with the IFC in the future, especially in your markets where they do invest quite heavily. We do use the EDGE criteria and the EDGE standards as a basis to understand status quo of performance of an organization in gender equality in the workplace, and on the basis of that, able to develop an action plan for performance improvement over time and to hold the hand of the organizations through their dedicated capacity building programs, which are very powerful and global. And then the whole solution is then audited by a third party. And here it's an independent, impartial system. So we have somebody else, specialist auditors, checking the accuracy and completion of the information so that everything that is assessed can be also verified independently. That gives that extra level of credibility to the information. And it supports, as you know, all of the reporting and disclosure, because all of your CFOs and the teams, the compliance teams and the investor relations that look after all the reporting requirements, they're always after externally audited and verifiable information. And this we have in this area as well. So we have two standards. One is a gender binary standard. That was where EDGE started, looking at women and men as different groups and assessing the pipelines and assessing the understanding of how they flow with the recruitment, the promotion, the performance management, the pay equity, etc., within an organization, and how that plays out, or where some of the gaps might be. We've added in the last 5 years an EDGE Plus angle, so an intersectional lens, because we've realized that women in intersection with other dimensions of diversity face different obstacles in different markets, different regions, different sectors. That may be based on race, ethnicity, maybe based on age, sexual orientation, disability, or socioeconomic background. So the assessment that organizations can do is looking at the career and talent management pipelines of women in intersection with other elements of diversity. And that gives a very rich analysis of where an organization stands in these issues. And some of it lets organizations hear a little bit the perceptions and understand their workforce much better in how that plays out, so they can look for solutions for that. Next, a little bit on the 4 pillars. We do look at data. So we look at representation. As I mentioned, we look at it across different levels of hierarchy, different job types. We look at representation across all value drivers of gender equality in the workplace, so performance management, top talent, leadership development, mentoring and sponsoring, part-time work, full-time work, so different levels of work, percentages, flexible working, and pay equity. Equity here, we look at also data in terms of we run an unexplained gender pay gap analysis or an adjusted pay gap analysis, as well as the average, to understand where pay sits using a regression analysis, which will take into consideration objective factors which can drive differences in the pay gap, and we'll exclude those from the analysis to make sure that we're looking really at the adjusted or unexplained gender pay gap of an organization. We look at the maturity of the policies practices, and here this aligns very much with many of the different frameworks, so in terms of what the policies and practices that we would expect to be undertaken. Here we've worked very strongly in collaboration with UN Women on their transparency and accountability framework, which is excellent. I encourage you to look at the new transparency and accountability framework, which has just been put out, which really looks at the maturity of policies and practices at different levels of maturity. We also look at the perceptions of employees, so we assess the experiences and the perceptions of employees in how they perceive and how they feel about the fairness of the policies and how they feel about the fairness of the numbers and the opportunities that they're given within the workforce to grow and to thrive. And so that gives an extra angle, if you like, to really understand and triangulate between data, policies, practices, and the architecture or the infrastructure, and the employee survey, which looks at the experiences. And this way we can really understand where an organization may have different gaps. Often an organization will say that they do a lot, they have great policies, practices, but the employees themselves will not perceive that that's the case. And there may be a communication gap or an implementation gap of those policies, practices. Sometimes there's a lag between what an organization does and how that plays out in the data. And so it's good to map and to measure over time how that data can be flowing through different cycles of management. There's 4 different levels of certification. So it is a performance management system with different levels of maturity and different levels of performance. There's no barriers to entry, so organizations can join regardless of their gender equality performance, score, maturity, they will be able to reach the EDGE Assess level if they go through the EDGE certification. This has been the case with some organizations in the South Pacific region. So Reni and Papua New Guinea, for example, have worked with the IFC successfully in going through the EDGE certification and adopting policies and practices which help to take them to a higher level of certification. And they can also look at EDGE Plus, obviously. Just shortly look at two specific examples. Perhaps it helps to look at what that means in practice for some examples. I know Landon talked about a few examples of organizations which are EDGE certified. CEMEX, for example, in the industry, in a heavy industry, very male dominated. L'Oreal is also EDGE certified, and they're obviously they're the opposite. They're in personal products and very women driven workforce. So you have different types of organizations which have different challenges to look at. This organization we looked at is in the energy sector. They went through a certification over 3 cycles, so each 2 years. You'll see that it was very heavily dominated by men, and this is the representation of 4 different levels of management. We look at junior, middle, upper, and top management. We break down the organization into different levels of responsibility and look at those recruitment, promotion, and representation numbers. You'll see that very heavily dominated by men. The red being the women representation here, and the organization wanted to do something about this over the medium term and set some targets to reach 30% of women at different levels of management within the organization. And that obviously is a very ambitious target, but there's different things that an organization can do about that. They can collect the data firstly and foremostly to understand where those gaps are. They can understand their recruitment and promotion practices and how those recruitment and practices are playing out in proportion with men and women. So is the proportion of men and the proportion of women equal in terms of those that are being promoted, those that are getting opportunities for career development, career advancement, the maybe some of the mandates which lead to promotions or leadership positions in the future, the succession pipelines, etc. So all of this can be analysed to see and to help to nurture a fair and equitable opportunity within the workforce, which this organisation was able to do. And measuring the data over 6 years, they were able to move the needle quite well on the numbers of women in management. And it's this is a trend which they've managed to keep going over time. A second organisation, more in the finance industry, financial services, has also a different set of challenges. Maybe they have often a very equal amount of employees coming into the organisation, but they also suffer a drop-off in women workers through middle management and upper management, often due to the culture of the financial organisations, or especially in profit and loss facing roles or asset management or investor related roles. Here the organisation wanted to work on the maturity of their policies and practices. We assess those in 5 different areas. So you'll see here the 5 different areas. It's very small, but you'll have the handouts you can look at. Recruitment, promotion, equal pay, leadership development, professional training, etc., flexible working and organizational culture. Looking at those 5 areas and maturity of the policies practices, this organisation was able to improve their maturity and the nature of the implementation of those policies and some of the practices that they undertook to support that. So to de-bias their systems, to make things fair, to push on equal pay, obviously to measure that appropriately, and to look at the outliers and to take action on the outliers, etc. And all of these elements helped to push the maturity of their policies practices to a higher level, which was what they wanted to achieve ultimately. So that was just 2 practical examples of what organizations do. Who we work with organizations globally. They don't have to be large organizations. The organization should have 100 employees or more to be EDGE certified, because of the nature of the data analysis and the impact that shows. Anything less is very difficult to sort of work with the whole statistical numbers from an anonymized and aggregated basis, because everything here we're talking about anonymized aggregated data. We're not looking at individual employees. We work with government organizations, UN agencies, international finance institutions such as the World Bank and IFC, Asian Development Bank, for example, but also some of the large multinationals across different markets. and some of the organizations in emerging markets, which really want to stand out and differentiate themselves in gender equality in the workplace. And that's something that Rhodes, for example, in Papua New Guinea, in the engineering and engineering construction sector, they've been able to do. They've really stood out. They've made some huge advancements in this area, which is incredible, and I think it's been felt in the success of the organization. But I'll stop there and take any questions. I realize we don't have too long left.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that, David. Really appreciate it. I don't see any questions, in fact, so I think you must have covered things so comprehensively that there are no questions. But big thank you for joining us. We really appreciate that, and yeah, really encourage everyone to take a look at Edge's work and resources as a great way to sort of guide and structure your approach. So thanks again. Okay, so from my side now, it's probably just a case of wrapping up the final points of our session. So to close things up, we want to just revisit that question that we asked ourselves at the beginning of the session regarding how well we understood these topics, just to see if hopefully we're feeling a little bit more confident on these things now. So I'll just reshare the Menti screen so we can have a look at that together. Maybe we can just reshare the link in the chat again, if that's okay. Thanks, Landon. So how comfortable are you now feeling about those different areas that we set out to help you on today? So I can see already the ones who've responded are showing quite a strong result, I think. So that's great to see. I think we were somewhere around the 5 for most of these last time. So a lot of you feeling more comfortable now. So that's great to see. Of course, we know that we can't fully address everything in one training session, but hopefully it's just a useful way to get a better appreciation of these areas and signpost some resources as well that you can use to take forward these topics and continue your learning. So I'll leave that question open, so feel free to continue to let us know your thoughts on that. And I'll just go back to the presentation now for a few final wrap-up slides. On that topic, really, of continuing your learning journey, I wanted to just recap on some of the resources that we can leave you with to take away. So just as a reminder, again, all of the materials from today's training workshop and the earlier sessions in the week and from our guest speakers are all available to download from the event webpage for today's session, which we've linked to in the chat. We'll be adding the recordings of the workshops to that page as well in the next day or two. And also just to highlight that within that handout, we'll have an extra slide here for each unit, which summarizes the key resources and tools that are available that we talk about in each unit. So I'll just run through to show you these slides are there, but find these in the handout with the links to all of the materials that we've talked about and shared with you in the chat as we move through the training. I'd also just like to highlight the work of our partners, the IFC, that can be really valuable here. The IFC Beyond the Balance Sheet program of resources is a really great tool spanning a range of topics across sustainability, corporate governance, and disclosure standards. So if you go to the website of the IFC Beyond the Balance Sheet program, and you can access that from the slides as well, you can find a whole host of materials that can be really beneficial to support your organizations here. I'll also just very quickly, if that's okay, pass back to Sarah just to speak quickly about the WEPS Awards upcoming in your region as well that she'd like to highlight to you.
Yes, thank you, Fiona. And we wanted to invite all of you to be part of this lunch event on the 21st of April at 11 a.m. Bangkok time. And that is going to be a great opportunity to learn on how to apply to become a WEPS awardee. This is for companies that are already signatories. So step number 1, become a signatory, and then you can learn how to apply and become even an awardee. This year, at the end of the year, we'll have our awards, WEPS awards. Thank you, Fiona. Back to you.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And maybe just as we're closing, if you could share that link in the chat with everyone if you have it available, that would be great. But yeah, I think it's on the slide there as well. You can see, so you can find that Asia Pacific WEPS Awards.org as well. Okay, and then from my side, just to say we're very grateful for your time and energy to participate in our training. And as a token of that appreciation, you're now able to receive a completion certificate for taking part as well. So you can get your certificate by filling out the survey that we will share with you. So Landon's just sent the link in the chat there to the feedback survey. So what you'll need to do is fill out that feedback survey, and then we'll send you a certificate to the address that you fill the survey out with. Please note that it might take up to a week to receive your certificate, so please be patient. If you don't receive it within that time frame, we'll be sure to get that across to you. But if you do have any issues following that, you can reach out to our team at the contact details in this presentation. But of course, we'd love to get your feedback on the program as well, so please do share your thoughts. And you can get your survey via your feedback certificate via that route. So from my side, all that remains is just to share the contact details of our organizations, which you can find in the slide presentation, and to say a big thank you to our guest speakers, to Guillaume and to David for joining us throughout the training today. And of course, a big thank you to the SSE official supporters who make a big contribution towards allowing this training to happen. And finally, to all of the partners involved in today's and Monday's training, in particular to our colleagues at UN Women, in particular to Sarah for joining us today, and to Tony earlier in the week. Of course, to our hosts at the South Pacific Stock Exchange, to Randy, Shiraj and team, and as well our partners at IFC and the government of Luxembourg for their support. And finally, just a big thank you, of course, to all of you who've taken the time to join us and participate in the training. We hope you've learned something helpful from our time together, and wish you the best of luck with taking this topic forward in your organisations. So we'll close the session there, and we wish you a great rest of your day. Thanks very much, everyone.